On July 15, 2008, Cindy Anthony dialed 911 for the third time that day. Her voice when the dispatcher answered was raw with panic.
"I found my daughter's car today and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car."
The dispatcher tried to calm her down, ask what was going on.
"My granddaughter has been taken. She's been missing for a month. My daughter finally admitted that she's been missing."
A month, 31 days. The dispatcher asked how old the child was.
"She's 2. She'll be 3 on August 9th.
Caylee Marie Anthony, brown hair, brown eyes, 2 years old, missing for 31 days before anyone called the police. When officers arrived at the Anthony home in Orlando, Florida, they found 22-year-old Casey Anthony, Caylee's mother, with a story about a babysitter, a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who she called Zanny the nanny. Casey said she'd left Caylee with Zanny on June 9th at the Sawgrass Apartments. When Casey came back, both Zanny and Caylee were gone. Casey led police to the apartment. It had been vacant for 142 days. The next day, Casey took investigators to Universal Studios, where she claimed she worked as an event coordinator. She walked them confidently through the hallways, past security, deeper into the building. Finally, she stopped. She hadn't worked there in over 2 years. Police arrested Casey Anthony for child neglect, providing false information to law enforcement, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. But Caylee was still missing. For 5 months, volunteers searched. Hundreds of thousands of tips poured in. The nation watched and waited and hoped. On December 11, 2008, a utility worker named Roy Kronk was checking a wooded area near the Anthony home, a spot he'd reported to police 3 times before. This time he found a bag. Inside was a small skull with duct tape across the mouth, a Winnie the Pooh blanket, tiny bones. Caylee Marie Anthony had been dead since June. Her body had been decomposing less than a quarter mile from her grandparents' house, while her mother partied at clubs, got a tattoo that said Bella Vita, beautiful life, and told lie after lie after lie. On October 14, 2008, Casey Anthony had been charged with first-degree murder. On July 5, 2011, a jury found her not guilty. The verdict shocked the nation, outraged it, and to this day, the question remains, what happened to Caylee Anthony, and why did her mother wait 31 days to report her missing? I'm Carmen Carrion, and this is Deadly Intent. Casey Marie Anthony was born on March 19, 1986 in Warren, Ohio, to Cindy and George Anthony. The family, including Casey's older brother Lee, moved to Orlando, Florida when Casey was young. George worked as a police officer before becoming a security guard. Cindy was a nurse. From the outside, they looked like a typical middle-class American family, but inside the Anthony home, tension simmered. Casey was described by childhood friends as bright, personable, and popular. But during her teenage years, a pattern emerged that would define her entire life. She lied, constantly, compulsively, about things that mattered and things that didn't. In high school, Casey told her family she was on track to graduate. Her parents planned a graduation party. They invited extended family, and then they discovered Casey was several credits short. She hadn't been attending classes. There would be no graduation. It was a small lie in the grand scheme of things, a teenager embarrassed about failing, but it revealed something crucial about Casey Anthony. She would rather construct an elaborate fiction than face an uncomfortable truth. In 2004, at 19 years old, Casey became pregnant. She denied it for months, even as her body changed visibly. She told friends she was just gaining weight. She told her parents she was a virgin, that she couldn't possibly be pregnant. Finally, when denial was no longer physically possible, she admitted the truth. On August 9, 2005, Caylee Marie Anthony was born. Casey refused to name the father. She gave different stories to different people. A young man who died in a car crash, a high school boyfriend, someone she met at a party whose name she couldn't remember. The father's identity remains unknown to this day. But despite the lies surrounding Caylee's conception, when she arrived, the Anthony family welcomed her with joy. Cindy and George doted on their granddaughter. They were deeply involved in her care, often functioning more as Caylee's primary caregivers than Casey did. By all accounts from friends and family, Caylee was a happy, bright, affectionate child. Photos show a beautiful little girl with big brown eyes and a radiant smile. She loved swimming in the backyard pool. She had a Winnie the Pooh blanket she carried everywhere. Casey appeared, at least on the surface, to be a loving mother. She posted photos on social media. She brought Caylee to family gatherings. She seemed proud of her daughter, but underneath, resentment was building. Before we go further, we need to talk about Casey Anthony's lying, because it's not just a character flaw. It's a window into her psychology and, ultimately, into her intent. Pathological lying, also called pseudologia fantastica, is different from typical dishonesty. Most people lie occasionally to avoid consequences or protect someone's feelings. Pathological liars create elaborate, often unnecessary fictions that serve no clear purpose. They lie when the truth would be easier. They lie when they're certain to be caught. Casey Anthony lied about graduating high school when her parents would obviously discover the truth at graduation. She lied about working at Universal Studios and then walked police through the building toward her non-existent office. She lied about a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez with such specificity, physical description, where she worked, where she lived, that police tracked down a real woman with that name, whose life was turned upside down by the accusation. These weren't strategic lies. These were compulsive fictions that Casey seemed unable to stop creating, even when they were actively destroying her credibility. Psychologically, pathological lying often develops as a coping mechanism for people who feel powerless in their real lives. By creating fictional realities where they're successful, important, and in control, they escape the inadequacy they feel in the truth. And Casey felt inadequate. She hadn't graduated high school. She didn't have a job, despite telling everyone she worked at Universal Studios. She lived with her parents. She depended on them financially. She had a 2-year-old daughter who required constant care and attention. In Casey's fiction, she was an event coordinator at Universal Studios with a busy social calendar and a nanny to watch Caylee. In reality, she was a high school dropout living in her childhood bedroom, asking her retired parents to babysit while she went out with friends. But here's what's crucial about pathological liars. They don't just lie to others. They lie to themselves. They start to believe their own fictions. The line between truth and fantasy becomes so blurred that they genuinely can't distinguish between them anymore. This matters when we talk about intent because Casey Anthony's lies weren't just covering up a crime. Her lies were her reality. And in her reality, Caylee wasn't missing. Caylee was with Zanny. Caylee was fine. Casey was at work. Everything was under control. Except it wasn't. And on some level, perhaps buried deep beneath the layers of fiction, Casey knew it. Intent doesn't lie. People do. And Casey Anthony had been lying her entire life. June 15th, 2008, Father's Day. Cindy Anthony took Caylee to visit Cindy's father at a nursing home. It was the last confirmed time anyone outside the Anthony family saw Caylee alive. Cindy took photos, the last photos ever taken of Caylee Marie Anthony, a beautiful 2-year-old in a pink and white outfit, smiling at the camera. That evening, Cindy and Caylee returned to the Anthony home and swam in the backyard pool. What happened next depends on whose story you believe. According to Casey's account, the one her defense team would present at trial years later, Caylee woke up on the morning of June 16th and wanted to go swimming. Casey was exhausted. She had been up late. George Anthony, Casey's father, said he would watch Caylee. Casey claims she took a nap. When she woke up, she went looking for Caylee and found George holding the child's lifeless body. Caylee had drowned in the pool. George, according to Casey, told her it was an accident. He would take care of it. No one needed to know. He held Caylee's body and told Casey, "It's going to be okay." And Casey, traumatized, in shock, conditioned by years of alleged sexual abuse by her father to do what he said, kept silent. This is the defense's version of events, the drowning theory. George Anthony vehemently denied this story. He denied ever finding Caylee's body. He denied covering up an accidental death. He denied sexually abusing Casey. So what does the evidence show? George Anthony testified that he saw Casey and Caylee leaving the house together on June 16th, around 12:50 p.m. Both were carrying backpacks. George, a former police officer, noticed these details because he always noticed details. That was the last time George saw his granddaughter alive. Here's what we know happened next. At 4:11 p.m. on June 16th, Casey made a series of frantic phone calls. She tried to reach her parents multiple times. The calls went unanswered. At 5:57 p.m., Casey arrived at her boyfriend Tony Lazzaro's apartment. At 7:58 p.m., Casey and Tony rented movies from Blockbuster. Security footage shows them together. Caylee is not with them. Casey stayed overnight at Tony's apartment. She stayed the next night, and the next, and the next. For 31 days, Casey Anthony did not live at home. For 31 days, when her parents asked where Caylee was, Casey had an excuse. Caylee was with the nanny. Caylee was at the beach. Caylee was in Jacksonville. Caylee was at the park. Caylee was spending time with Zanny's family. And while Caylee's body decomposed in the trunk of Casey's white Pontiac Sunfire, and then later in the woods behind the Anthony house, Casey Anthony went to parties. She attended 4th of July fireworks at Lake Eola with friends. She participated in a hot body contest at Fusion nightclub. She went shopping. She spent time with Tony. She posted photos on social media with captions about living her best life. On July 2, 2008, 16 days after Caylee was last seen alive, Casey walked into Cast Iron Tattoos in Orlando. She had an appointment scheduled. She sat in the chair and asked the tattoo artist Bobby Williams to ink Bella Vita on her left shoulder. Beautiful life. Williams would later testify that Casey seemed happy, normal. She told him her daughter was with her nanny and should bring Caylee next time she came in. She smiled. She chatted. She paid her $65. Bella Vita. Meanwhile, Casey's car was deteriorating. George and Cindy Anthony started receiving notice from a tow yard that Casey's car had been abandoned in an Amscott parking lot. On July 15th, George went to collect it. When the tow yard employee opened the trunk, the smell hit them both immediately. George Anthony knew that smell. He'd been a police officer. He'd worked homicide cases. He knew what human decomposition smelled like. He drove the car home with the windows down. He told Cindy there had been a dead body in the trunk. That afternoon, Cindy tracked down Casey at Tony's apartment. She demanded to see Caylee. Casey said Caylee was with Zanny. Cindy insisted they go get her. Casey kept stalling. Finally, Cindy snapped. She told Casey if she didn't produce Caylee immediately, she was calling the police. That's when Casey told her mother she hadn't seen Caylee in 31 days. Let's stop and really examine what Casey Anthony did during those 31 days, because her behavior during this period is crucial to understanding intent. If Caylee drowned accidentally on June 16th, as the defense claimed, and George convinced Casey to cover it up, what would we expect to see from Casey psychologically? We'd expect shock, trauma, grief barely contained. We'd expect someone going through the motions of normal life while internally falling apart. We'd expect drinking to numb the pain, erratic behavior, withdrawing from friends, breaking down when alone. What we would not expect is someone participating in hot body contests, getting tattoos that celebrate beautiful life, shopping for lingerie, and posting party photos on social media. This isn't grief. This isn't trauma. This is someone who is relieved. The prosecution at trial would argue that Caylee's death wasn't an accident. It was murder, and the motive was simple. Casey wanted her life back. Being a single mother at 22 meant responsibility. It meant staying home while friends went out. It meant depending on her parents, whom she resented. It meant a crying toddler who needed constant attention and supervision. But without Caylee, Casey could sleep at her boyfriend's apartment every night. She could go to clubs. She could be young and free and unencumbered. Bella Vita, beautiful life. The prosecution introduced evidence of computer searches conducted on the Anthony family computer on June 16th, the day Caylee disappeared. Using Casey's password-protected account, someone searched for foolproof suffocation at 2:51 p.m. Think about that timing. George testified he saw Casey and Caylee leave at 12:50 p.m. At 2:51 p.m., someone using Casey's account searched for foolproof suffocation methods. At 4:11 p.m., Casey made frantic phone calls trying to reach her parents. By 5:57 p.m., she was at Tony's apartment. By 7:58 p.m., she was renting movies with Tony, without Caylee. The defense argued George did the searches, contemplating suicide. But George didn't use that computer account. Casey did. The most damning evidence of intent, though, isn't the computer searches. It's not even the Bella Vita tattoo. It's the duct tape. When Caylee's remains were discovered, her skull still had duct tape adhered to it. The medical examiner testified that the duct tape had been placed over Caylee's mouth and nose, enough to cover the airways. The tape was identical to duct tape found in the Anthony garage. Forensic experts conducted a facial superimposition. They took a photo of Caylee alive and overlaid the skull with the duct tape. The tape would have covered her nose and mouth completely when she was alive. The defense argued the duct tape was placed there later, that someone put it on the garbage bag or that it migrated during decomposition. But Dr. Jan Garavaglia, the medical examiner, testified that based on the positioning, the duct tape had been on Caylee's face when she died, and duct tape over a child's nose and mouth is not consistent with drowning. It's consistent with suffocation. The prosecution's theory was that Casey used chloroform to sedate Caylee. Abnormally high levels of chloroform were detected in the car trunk, and then suffocated her with duct tape. Casey left Caylee's body in the car trunk for several days, which would explain the overwhelming smell of decomposition. When the smell became too strong, Casey moved the body to the wooded area near her parents' house, where it would remain for 5 months. The defense's theory required believing that George found Caylee drowned, convinced Casey to help cover it up, somehow get access to Casey's computer to search for suffocation methods, and then duct tape a dead child's face for unknown reasons. Occam's razor suggests the simpler explanation. Casey killed Caylee. She searched for ways to do it. She did it, and then she lived the beautiful life she'd always wanted. Except she got caught. Intent doesn't lie. People do. And Casey Anthony spent 31 days lying about where her daughter was, while Caylee's body decomposed in the Florida heat. The trial of Casey Anthony began on May 24, 2011, at the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando. Judge Belvin Perry presided. The jury had been selected from Pinellas County, across the state in Clearwater, because the case had received such intense media coverage in the Orlando area that finding impartial jurors locally was impossible. The jury was sequestered, 12 jurors and 5 alternates, 9 women, 8 men. They would spend 6 weeks hearing evidence while cut off from the outside world, unaware that their verdict would become one of the most controversial in American legal history. Lead prosecutor Linda Drain Burdick laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She described the 31 days, the partying, the lies. She showed the jury 2 photos side by side, Caylee alive and smiling, and Caylee's skull as it was found, with duct tape across the mouth. No one knows where Caylee is, and Casey Anthony is gallivanting around Orlando, Burdick said. It is difficult to understand why a mother would kill her child. There's no other conclusion that can be drawn. At the end of this case, you will have no trouble concluding that Caylee Anthony was murdered by her mother. Then Jose Baez, lead defense attorney for Casey Anthony, stood up and changed everything. This is not a murder case, Baez said. This is not a case of manslaughter. This is not a case of aggravated child abuse. This is not even a case of neglect. This is a case about a little girl who drowned in her family's swimming pool. The drowning defense. And then Baez went further. He accused George Anthony of finding Caylee's body and orchestrating the cover-up. He accused George of sexually abusing Casey since she was 8 years old. He claimed this abuse led to Casey's compulsive lying. It was a defense mechanism, a survival tactic learned in childhood. George Anthony took the stand and denied everything under oath. He denied finding Caylee's body. He denied the cover-up. He denied the sexual abuse allegations with tears streaming down his face. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The prosecution presented forensic evidence: the chloroform in the car trunk, the duct tape on Caylee's skull, the entomology evidence showing the body had been in the woods since June or July. They presented testimony from Casey's friends describing her party lifestyle during the 31 days. They showed the jury the Bella Vita tattoo. The defense attacked the forensics as junk science. They suggested Roy Kronk, the utility worker who found Caylee's remains, had moved the body to collect reward money. They hammered on the fact that the medical examiner couldn't determine a specific cause of death. The remains were too decomposed. And they kept returning to the same theme. Where is the evidence that Casey murdered Caylee? Where is the DNA? Where is the proof? On June 27, 2011, something unexpected happened. Defense attorney Cheney Mason filed a motion questioning whether Casey Anthony was competent to stand trial. Judge Perry ordered psychiatric evaluation. 3 psychologists examined Casey. All 3 found her competent. The trial continued. The prosecution called nearly 100 witnesses. The defense called fewer than 40. Neither side could produce definitive proof of what happened to Caylee Anthony. On July 3, 2011, closing arguments began. Assistant State Attorney Jeff Ashton reminded the jury of Casey's behavior during the 31 days. Responses to grief are varied as the day is long, he said, but responses to guilt are oh so predictable. What do guilty people do? They lie. They avoid. They run. They mislead. They divert attention away from themselves and they act like nothing is wrong. Linda Drain Burdick ended the state's rebuttal by showing a photo of the Bella Vita tattoo and asking, whose life was better without Caylee? On July 5, 2011, after deliberating for less than 11 hours, the jury returned. Not guilty of first-degree murder. Not guilty of aggravated manslaughter. Not guilty of aggravated child abuse. Guilty on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The courtroom erupted. Spectators screamed. George Anthony collapsed in tears. Cindy Anthony sobbed uncontrollably. Casey Anthony showed no visible emotion. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered in rage. Hundreds of thousands of people flooded social media with outrage. The verdict was called a miscarriage of justice, a failure of the system, an insult to Caylee's memory. In the years since the verdict, several jurors have spoken publicly about their decision, and their reasoning reveals something important about the difference between what we believe happened and what we can prove beyond reasonable doubt. The jury believed Casey was involved in Caylee's death. They believed she lied. They believed her behavior during the 31 days was suspicious and disturbing, but they didn't know how Caylee died. The medical examiner couldn't determine cause of death because the remains were skeletal. There was no DNA evidence on the duct tape. The chloroform evidence was disputed. The computer searches showed someone researched suffocation, but didn't prove Casey acted on that research. The drowning theory, as outrageous as it seemed, created reasonable doubt. Because if there was even a possibility that Caylee drowned and the family covered it up, then the prosecution hadn't proven murder beyond a reasonable doubt. One juror later said, "I did not say she was innocent. I just said there wasn't enough evidence. If you cannot prove what the crime was, you cannot determine what the punishment should be." Another juror said, "Everybody agreed if we were going fully on feelings and emotions, she was done. But that's not what we were supposed to do." This is where the justice system and public opinion diverge. The public saw a mother who didn't report her child missing for 31 days, who partied and got tattoos while her daughter's body decomposed, who lied to police repeatedly. That behavior, to most people, screams guilt. But the jury's job wasn't to determine if Casey was a good mother or a bad person. Their job was to determine if the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed first-degree murder. And despite the mountain of circumstantial evidence, there was no smoking gun, no confession, no witness to the actual death, No definitive cause of death determined by the medical examiner. The prosecution couldn't prove whether Caylee was suffocated, drowned, poisoned, or died some other way. They couldn't prove exactly when she died or where she was killed. They built a compelling narrative based on Casey's behavior and forensic evidence. But narratives aren't convictions. Reasonable doubt is. And the defense created just enough of it. But here's what the jury's verdict doesn't change. Intent. Casey Anthony's intent is written in those 31 days. It's written in the computer search for foolproof suffocation. It's written in the Bella Vita tattoo. It's written in the lies, the constant, elaborate, unnecessary lies. It's written in the fact that Casey never called 911, never searched for Caylee, never filed a missing persons report. If Caylee drowned accidentally, any reasonable person would have called for help, would have tried to save her, would have called 911 even if it was too late, because that's what you do when a child stops breathing. But Casey didn't do any of those things. Whether the jury could prove beyond reasonable doubt that Casey murdered Caylee is a legal question, but whether Casey's behavior reveals her intent is a psychological one. And psychologically, Casey Anthony's actions show someone who was relieved her daughter was dead. Intent doesn't lie. People do. On July 17, 2011, 12 days after her acquittal, Casey Anthony walked out of the Orange County Jail. She had been sentenced to 4 years for lying to law enforcement, but with time served and good behavior credit, she was free. Protesters lined the streets. Death threats poured in. Casey Anthony had become the most hated woman in America. She went into hiding. For the next several years, Caylee lived a quiet, secretive life. She reportedly worked as a research assistant for Patrick McKenna, the lead investigator on her defense team. She did legal research, paralegal work. She stayed out of the public eye. George and Cindy Anthony, devastated by Caylee's death and the trial, tried to rebuild their lives. Their relationship with Casey was effectively over. George later said he didn't know if Casey killed Caylee, but he knew she was responsible for not reporting her missing. In 2017, Casey gave an interview to the Associated Press. She claimed that the last time she saw Caylee, she believed Caylee was alive and was going to be okay. She maintained the drowning story. She blamed her father. In November 2022, Casey appeared in a Peacock docuseries titled Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. In it, she doubled down on her accusations against George Anthony. She claimed he disposed of Caylee's body. She claimed the sexual abuse started when she was 8. George and Cindy Anthony denied these claims. Their attorney called the documentary her latest exploitation of Caylee's death. And then in March 2025, Casey Anthony did something that shocked even those who thought they could no longer be shocked by her. She joined TikTok. On March 1st, 2025, Casey posted a video from her car. In it, she announced she was launching a career as a legal advocate. "My name is Casey Anthony," she said to the camera. "My daughter is Caylee Anthony. My parents are George and Cindy Anthony. This is not about them. This is not in response to anything they've said or done. This is for me to begin to reintroduce myself." She explained that she had been working in the legal field since 2011, the year of her trial, and now wanted to use her platform to advocate for others facing legal challenges. "I feel that it's important that I use this platform that was thrust upon me and now look at as a blessing, as opposed to the curse that it has been since 2008, Casey said. A blessing. The death of her 2-year-old daughter, the trial, the media circus, the national outrage, all of it, in Casey's words, was now a blessing, a platform she could use. She promoted her Substack account with a $10 monthly subscription. She said she would provide legal advice and advocacy. She mentioned supporting the LGBTQ community and women's rights. She claimed she would advocate for myself and also advocate for my daughter. The video received over 2 million views. The comments section was disabled. Prosecutor Jeffrey Ashton, who tried the case against Casey in 2011, told Inside Edition, "She is one of the most accomplished liars I have ever seen." Gerardo Bloise, a former crime scene investigator with the Orange County Sheriff's Office who worked on the case, said Casey has no credibility and is not capable of advising anyone on legal matters. The only advice she can give is lie, lie, lie. George and Cindy Anthony's former attorney told the media that Caylee was using her infamy to get attention and money, and using George, Cindy, and Caylee as the hook for people. Caylee Anthony, acquitted of murder but convicted in the court of public opinion, was now monetizing her notoriety. She was turning the death of her daughter into a brand. The audacity of it is almost incomprehensible. Before we close, we need to remember the person who was lost in all of this. Not Caylee Anthony, not George or Cindy, not the lawyers or the jurors or the media personalities who made careers discussing this case. Caylee Marie Anthony, born August 9, 2005, died sometime around June 16, 2008. 2 years old. Caylee never got to start preschool. She never got to learn to ride a bike. She never got to make friends, have a first day of school, lose a tooth, celebrate her 3rd birthday. She loved swimming. She loved her great-grandfather. She had a Winnie the Pooh blanket. In the last photograph ever taken of her, she's wearing a pink and white striped shirt, sitting on her great-grandfather's lap at the nursing home. She's smiling. Her brown eyes are bright. She looks happy. That was June 15, 2008. Within 24 hours, Caylee was dead, and her body was left in a car trunk, then dumped in the woods like garbage, wrapped in a laundry bag with duct tape across her mouth, to decompose in the Florida heat while insects fed on her remains. She was 2 years old. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide by undetermined means. Legally, we don't know how Caylee died. We don't know if she suffered. We don't know her last moments. But we know she deserved better. She deserved a mother who would protect her. She deserved to be reported missing immediately when she disappeared. She deserved to have people searching for her while she was still alive, not weeks after she was already dead. She deserved justice. And whether the jury's verdict was legally correct, the fact remains: Caylee Anthony is dead, and the person responsible for her safety, her mother, waited 31 days to report her missing. Caylee's case led to Caylee's law being passed in Florida and other states. This legislation makes it a felony for a parent or guardian to fail to report a missing child within 24 hours, and to fail to report a child's death within 2 hours. It's a law written in Caylee's memory, trying to ensure no other child goes missing for a month while their caregiver parties and lies. Caylee Marie Anthony should have turned 20 in August 2025. She should be in college now. She should have had a whole life ahead of her. Instead, her legacy is a sensational trial, a controversial verdict, and a mother who now uses the platform that was thrust upon her to build a brand as a legal advocate. Caylee deserves to be remembered as more than that. She was a child, a little girl with brown eyes and a beautiful smile, a little girl who loved swimming and her great-grandfather and Winnie the Pooh. She was loved by her grandparents. She mattered, and she deserved so much better than what she got. The Caylee Anthony case isn't a mystery. It's a tragedy wrapped in lies and buried under 31 days of calculated deception. We know Caylee died around June 16, 2008. We know her mother didn't report her missing for 31 days. We know Caylee lied to police, to her family, to everyone. We know Caylee partied, got tattoos, and lived what she called a beautiful life, while her daughter's body decomposed. What we don't know, what we can't prove beyond reasonable doubt, is exactly how Caylee died, and that's why Caylee Anthony was acquitted. But acquittal doesn't mean innocence. It means the prosecution couldn't meet their burden of proof. It means the jury had reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean Caylee Anthony didn't kill her daughter. The question that haunts this case is why. If Caylee did kill Caylee, and the evidence strongly suggests she did, why would a mother murder her own child? The prosecution's theory was simple: freedom. Caylee was 22 years old, living at home with her parents, caring for a demanding toddler. She wanted to party, to date, to be young and unencumbered. Caylee was an obstacle to the life she wanted. But there's something even darker at play here, something about how Caylee relates to reality itself. Caylee Anthony doesn't just lie to others. She lies to herself. She constructs fictional realities so complete, so detailed, so elaborate that she seems to genuinely believe them. The job at Universal Studios, the nanny named Zanny, the wealthy boyfriend, The whole manufactured life. When confronted with facts that contradict her fictions, Caylee doesn't adjust to reality. She doubles down on the lies. She walked police through Universal Studios toward her non-existent office. She gave them Zanny's physical description and address. This isn't normal lying. This is someone who has lost the ability to distinguish between truth and fantasy. So when Caylee died, whether by accident or by intent, Casey's brain did what it had always done. It constructed a fiction. In that fiction, Caylee wasn't dead. Caylee was with Zanny. Caylee was fine. Casey didn't need to report anything because nothing was wrong, except Caylee's body was decomposing in the trunk of Casey's car. But Caylee could compartmentalize that. She could go to clubs and get tattoos and live her beautiful life while simultaneously carrying her daughter's corpse in her car, because in her mind, those were two separate realities. The partying Caylee and the grieving mother Caylee didn't have to coexist, because they existed in different fictions. This is the psychology of someone fundamentally disconnected from reality. And that disconnection didn't start when Caylee died. It had been building for years, through lie after lie after lie, until Casey Anthony lived almost entirely in a world of her own creation. And when that fictional world required Caylee's death to make sense, when the life Caylee wanted couldn't coexist with a 2-year-old daughter who needed care, Caylee became a problem to be solved. Whether Caylee consciously planned Caylee's murder, or whether something happened in a moment of frustration or opportunity, we'll likely never know. But we know this. After Caylee died, Caylee had choices. She could have called 911. She could have sought help. She could have told someone, anyone, that Caylee was gone. She didn't. Instead, she put duct tape across her daughter's face. She put Caylee's body in a garbage bag with her Winnie the Pooh blanket. She left her in the trunk of her car until the smell became unbearable. Then she dumped her daughter's body in the woods a 1/4 mile from home and went on living her life. 31 days. 31 days of partying and lying and living the beautiful life, while Caylee's remains decomposed in the Florida heat. That is intent. Not the murder itself. We can't prove that beyond reasonable doubt. But the aftermath, the choices, the behavior, those 31 days are Casey Anthony's intent laid bare. And now, 16 years later, Casey is on TikTok calling her infamy a blessing. She's monetizing the tragedy. She's using the death of her daughter as a platform to build a career giving legal advice. The audacity is staggering. But it's also perfectly consistent with who Casey Anthony has always been, someone who takes tragedy and twists it into whatever narrative serves her best. Caylee's death wasn't murder, it was an accident. The trial wasn't a prosecution, it was a persecution. Her notoriety isn't a consequence, it's a blessing. Her daughter isn't dead, she's a platform. Intent doesn't lie. People do. Casey Anthony has been lying her entire life. The only thing that changed on June 16, 2008 was that her lies cost her daughter her life. And the only thing that changed since July 5, 2011 is that Casey got away with it. Now, before we wrap up, I need to be clear about something. In 2011, a jury found Casey Anthony not guilty of murdering her daughter Caylee. That's the legal verdict, and it stands. But as I've said repeatedly from the beginning of this show, intent doesn't lie. People do. I'm not here to tell you Casey Anthony is absolutely guilty. That's not my call to make. What I've done today is analyze the behavioral evidence, the patterns, the choices made in those 31 days. I've shown you what intent reveals when we strip away the stories people tell. A courtroom requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I look at what actions tell us about what someone wanted, feared, and was willing to do. You've heard the evidence. You've seen the patterns. You can draw your own conclusions about what Casey Anthony's behavior reveals about her intent. But Caylee Marie Anthony is still dead, and she deserves to be remembered as more than a cautionary tale, more than a controversial trial, more than her mother's platform. She deserves to be remembered as Caylee, a child who was loved, who mattered, and was worth so much more than 31 days of lies. Rest in peace, Caylee Marie Anthony. You deserved better. Next time on Deadly Intent, the Ken and Barbie murders. They looked like the perfect couple. Young, attractive, successful. the kind of neighbors you'd wave to from your driveway. But behind the suburban facade of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka was something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Between 1990 and 1992, they terrorized southern Ontario, leaving a trail of victims that included Carla's own sister. And when it all came crashing down, Carla made a deal with the devil. Or rather, she made a deal as the devil, trading testimony against Paul for a reduced sentence. The prosecution called her a battered wife, a victim manipulated by a monster. The videotapes told a different story. A couple who hunted together, killed together, and when caught, turned on each other in a desperate bid for freedom. Paul Bernardo is serving life in prison. Carla Homolka walked free after 12 years and now lives under a new name. But intent doesn't lie, and the tapes don't lie either. The Ken and Barbie murders, next time on Deadly Intent.